Hello, welcome everyone to this training session, Writing Powerful Email Blasts. My name is Teehee Hazlett, Teehee like the giggle, like hee 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 hee, is the easy way to pronounce my name. I have no idea how many people are in this session because of the way that this platform is designed. So please feel free to introduce yourself or say anything in the chat or comment feature. I can see the chats. I can't necessarily respond to them, but I will see them and will respond as we go through. So a couple of folks are there. Hello, Heather, Gavin, and Amanda. I'm glad that I'm not talking to a blank wall, which is what I see if I look ahead of my computer. Yay, more folks are here. Cool. So I'm going to hop right in and start a screen share so that you'll be able to see what I am doing. Do, do, do. Not that. There we go. How should I present? Does this work? Ha ha. Ha ha ha. I think this works. Cool. So, writing powerful email blasts. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Teehee, like the giggle. I've been writing email copy for about 8 years. I started at the Working Families Party and their Nancy digital program and helped build that up. And now I work at Demand Progress. The other thing that I do within the Netroots progressive activisty world is I'm a lead trainer with the Center for Story-Based Strategy, and I'm part of their training network, which is an interesting combination of like the creative side of activism and the strategic side that I think also draws a lot into how I go about writing email copy. Which I think makes me kind of like special and fun. I love this about myself. I also have an MFA in creative writing. I have a bachelor's in linguistics with a concentration in creative writing. So my whole adult education has been trying to move people and evoke emotions through the written word, which I think is one of the reasons I gravitated towards writing email copy because it's very, very similar. Let's check the chats and comments real quick before moving on. Greetings, greetings. Also, there'll be a chance at the end for questions. If you have questions, we'll do a Q&A thing. But if not, you can pop them up in the chat as well. That is totally fine. So you can tell this slide is old from previous email or previous training, but email is still the most effective way to reach your members and supporters and potential donors, even in 2020, even in 2021. Everybody is on TikTok, which is true. But if you're wanting to make like a big impact and mobilize your members, email is still one of the most effective ways to reach people. So, but then here's the big caveat. Studies show that people will only read your email for 2 to 7 seconds. This is what we call in, the email copy, right? Email that somebody didn't explicitly ask for, that just shows up in their inbox. 2 to 7 seconds is not a lot of time. And you have to get a lot done in that amount of time. You can think of it like 1,000, 1,000. That's it. That's all you got. So, how do you communicate your campaign goals, the issue, frame it in the way that you want, evoke an emotional response that pushes people to take action or donate money in 1,000, 1,000? We're going to get into it right now. So, yeah, good email has a lot of ground to cover and not a lot of time. There's 5 basic components of a good email. You absolutely need like a click-worthy subject line, or else no one's even going to open your email. You need to have a really engaging hook right at the beginning. You also need to demonstrate a clear theory of change. You need to have a strong ask. And what I propose is you also need to have an emotional resolution for your readers so that when they take action, they feel like they've actually done something. And that will help them want to continue to take more actions in the future. So this is generally when I write emails, this is kind of the outline of what it looks like. You have your subject line, you're like, dear first name, bam, you got to hit them with the hook, transition really quickly to the theory of change, a strong ask, some additional information below the fold is what I call the first link. And mostly what you put in there is helpful, but it's not actually important. Restate your theory of change, End with a strong ask again. Thanks, sign off. That's basically it. It's really, really short, but that does not mean that it's necessarily easy or simple. Um, so when it comes to drafting emails, these are the 5 things that we tend to have. I usually start with the last step and work my way towards the first step. I write these in reverse order. It's kind of out of habit, and it's because, well, we'll go through it. There's some like strategic reasons why you should probably want to do this in reverse order. Okay. So, the first step, the emotional resolution. It's very important to decide this before you begin writing. How do you want your reader to feel when they're reading the email? What kinds of emotions do you want them to feel after they take action? It should be kind of like an arc, right, between two different emotions. Here's some examples like outrage into vindication, fear, concern into feeling safe, like empathy into solidarity, shock and disgust versus like energized and in control. It's good to have these things in your brain because this is going to help you figure out the tone of how you're going to write your email and the voice that you want to use in your email. So let's look at some examples. So here's one. Also, maybe somebody can throw in the chat. How well can you see and read what's on the screen? It's too small. Okay, let's go back. We find a way to enter full screen. Here we go. Cool. So this is from the Food and Water Action email list. Obviously, their logo is right up there. So here we go. I just learned some unsettling news. The FDA took a step that endangers food safety and public health during a pandemic. It granted a regulatory waiver to speed up slaughter lines at a chicken plant that has repeatedly violated safety regulations and even threatened food safety inspectors. And there's only one trained government inspector at the end of the slaughter line inspecting 3 birds every second. While we are all dealing with the national public health crisis, the USDA is putting our safety further at risk by waiving our most basic food safety protections. But we can stop them. Food and Water Action is mobilizing to force Congress to stop the USDA from endangering our food and public health. But your congressional representatives need to hear from you. Send a message to your representative demanding that the USDA stop any and all future food safety waivers. Now, I'm going to go out of this for a second so I can actually look at the comments. But what do you think is the emotional frame that is being employed in this example? Anybody? If there was like an arc, like an emotional arc from like how you felt at the beginning to how you would feel after you took action. Fear, outrage, yeah. Definitely kind of like outrage when you think about like how lax like food safety can be. Fear and outrage for sure. And then you kind of like feel a little bit more in control. It kind of gets like abated because you're like, oh, I can do something about this so that I don't have to feel this way anymore. So that's the first example. Let's go into the second. I will make it bigger. So this is from Daily Coast. COVID-19 poses a major threat to jails, prisons, and detention centers across the country. In an environment where sick staff have been working and hand sanitizer is considered contraband, incarcerated people are at a high risk of being infected. If the coronavirus spreads inside a facility, it could be catastrophic, especially for the elderly and those already ill. Social distancing is impossible. Living conditions under pre COVID circumstances are lethal, and healthcare accessibility is wholly inadequate. Immigrants at the Essex County Correctional Facility in Newark, New Jersey, are already taking action and have begun a hunger strike and protests of their ongoing detention and are undergoing horrid conditions and treatment. Sign the petition to demand that Congress take the necessary steps to ensure that incarcerated people in detention centers and prisons are not fatally impacted by the coronavirus. So let's also think about this one. What are some of the emotions that you think are being conveyed in this email copy? Somebody says disgust into empowerment. For this one here too, just because I guess of who I am as a person, like hearing that the conditions within our correctional facilities are like really, really bad anyway, but then gonna be very much worse because of the pandemic. It like inspired a lot of like empathy and solidarity. Yes, a couple of people are saying that in the chat. Yeah, this sense of like, oh my gosh, like you really have this concern for these inmates. And then you take some action and you're like, yes, you're part of the solution. You're taking action with other people for a specific cause, and that feels good, and that will make sure people continue to want to take action. So one thing to remember is to be strategic. Deciding on the emotional resolution should be a conscious choice you're making, because if it's not, then you are actually always making that choice anyway. But if it's an unconscious one, you can strike the wrong tone. You can have something that goes out that like actually gives you bad press because it's tone deaf. It's important to be very strategic about why and how you're communicating. So the next step, the strong ask. So let me also enlarge in this. I'll read both of these. This was actually a test that I did in A/B test when I was working at the Working Families Party. So we had one email that said, "We want to put up a billboard shaming science museums for keeping David Koch on their board. Can you chip in $3 to help make it happen?" Versus the same email, but the ask was changed, and it said, "If you're able, please give to the campaign against David Koch." So, which one of these do you think raised more money? If folks want to jump into the chat, which one do they think raised more money? The first one. Why? Why do you think the first one raised? And you're right, it did. It totally blew the other one out of the water. And why is that? Part of the reason is that it was direct, it was specific, and it's measurable, right? So we're not just saying, like, give us money because we need money. Give us money because we're going to do this very specific thing. And it's going to be something measurable and in the real world. And yes, like somebody says in the comments, it's very clear. You give $3, it goes exactly towards this thing, right? That is sort of the bread and butter when it comes to fundraising for emails. Is as much as you can, you should let people know exactly where their money is going. It makes them feel safer and it makes them feel involved, like they're actually a part of this campaign and a part of the larger activism community. So don't be afraid to ask for what your organization needs. I know a lot of folks probably have seen emails from different like big lists saying like at the end of the year, like, oh my God, we might be running out of money. Now, sometimes for good actors and people who are good stewards of email, this is true. Sometimes it's not true, and they use it as a bait just to get people involved. But to be ethical, ask for what you need. If you're in a dire situation, tell your tell the folks on your email list. Find ways for them to get involved and help. Yeah, and somebody mentioned this in the comments. Sometimes it's a little sensationalist. There's a balance. I think the right way to go is just to try to follow your ethics and values. But sometimes sensationalism is necessary. Not all the times, but sometimes. Three, a strong or a clear theory of change. I'm going to make this wider too so that everybody can see this because this is very important. If you do X, then Y will happen for Z issue. That's basically a theory of change sentence in a nutshell. It is a clear theory of change will explain why taking the action will have the effect for your campaign. It's a strategy sentence. It sort of lays out the road. This is how we get to liberation. This is how we get to justice. This is how we get to equity, right? We have to do X and then Y will happen for this reason. I've, over the course of my career, tested because I was a skeptic about this and was like, do you really need a theory of change sentence? Maybe you don't. I've tested it a lot and it turns out it's totally necessary. especially for fundraising emails. Here are two examples. Let's go back wider screen. So the first one says the House already passed the George Floyd Act, but Republicans can use the filibuster to block the George Floyd Act in the Senate. Instead of holding police accountable when they kill people, Republicans in the Senate will use a procedural roadblock to make sure no real reforms can pass. That's why it's absolutely critical that you speak up and speak loudly, and to do so right now. Sign the petition, tell Congress to end the filibuster and pass the George Floyd Act. That's one example. The other one, Amazon thinks just because they're rich and large, that means they're in charge and that they can treat their employees however they want. They think no one is strong enough to stop them, but they're wrong. Congress can regulate how Amazon operates and treats their workers. They could do it now if you speak up. Sign the petition, tell Congress to protect delivery drivers and investigate Amazon's labor practices. So these are two examples. I wonder, I'll give folks some time to put in the chat if there's like thoughts, reflections on these. Are these clear theory of changes? And where is the clear theory of change within them? We'll give folks a minute, but I do have to get out of the full screen so that I can see what's going on in the chat. And there may be somewhat of a lag in the chat. That is also fine. But in those two examples, where do people feel like the theory of change was? Yeah, Patricia Murphy says there's nobody to stop them, but if you sign this, we can pass regulations to stop Amazon. Yeah, it's actually a strategy sentence, right? And it makes sense when you read it. You're like, oh, okay, I'll pressure Congress. Congress will do this thing. And then workers will get treated better. If only Congress could actually get their stuff together. Ren Patton says it's also in the hyperlinks. Yeah, the hyperlinks, for the most part, I try to put the ask there. The really clear thing of like what you're asking people to do. You're asking them to tell Congress to protect delivery drivers and investigate Amazon, or you're asking them to end the filibuster and pass the George Floyd Act. It's usually the theory of change sentence is usually the one that's right before the link. Molly says the Amazon one feels more persuasive because of the if this will happen if blank framing. Yeah, yeah. I do think I will fully admit I wrote both of those examples last year. But I do think the Amazon one, also because I hate Amazon, I tend to write better copy against Amazon campaigns because they suck. But I do agree with you, Molly, that I think that that is a better theory of change among the ones that I wrote. Okay, so first you figure out the emotional resolution you want, then you write the strong ask, then you write the theory of change. After that, you have quite a bit of material and quite a bit of context to now work on one of the hardest parts of email writing, which is the engaging hook. So you have to keep in mind you only have people's eyeballs for 2 to 7 seconds tops, which means that the first sentence, the first few words are the most important in your email and will probably live and die on the first couple of words that you use, and definitely the first and second sentence. You have to grab people's attention, but you also need to leave them wanting more so that they'll continue to read. So I will have some examples here. Oh yeah, okay, this one. Not gonna lie to you, this is one of the most difficult parts of writing email copy because so much is reliant on it. One of the pro tips that I usually do is after I write the strong ask and the theory of change, and I have a good idea about what this email is going to be about, and I'm like, oh, what's a good hook? I will actually get up and take a short walk, like go outside, kind of get your mind, let your mind like travel a little bit before you come back because it might dislodge some really good ideas. It might help hone in. It's important to take a lot of time to think about the hook that you're going to use because it is so important. Oh yeah, and if you already know the emotional resolution you want your readers to feel, and you've already written out your ask and your clear theory of change, then writing this hook could be a lot easier. So here are some examples. I'm going to go into full screen so you can see it again. I'll read all of these. And then, yeah, in the chat, put which one do you think would keep you reading this email? So the first one says, right now, Trump thinks he's unstoppable, but he's wrong. Trump has been asking Congress to rubber stamp a renewal of the Patriot Act that will let his administration continue to spy on Americans without a warrant. So that's the first one. Second one, rent is due tomorrow, but millions of families across the country aren't going to be able to pay it. And then the third one, these are all kind of written at the beginning of the pandemic, if you haven't figured that out. The third one, guess who's not staying home from work these next few weeks? ICE agents. And then the fourth one, if you have kids in high school, they've probably read Orwell's 1984, but now they'll get a chance to live in a real world tech dystopia. So also full disclosure, I wrote all four of these and tested them against other different versions, but these were the ones that tended to do kind of good. So let's see in the chat, which one of these would pull your curiosity strings more to continue reading? So some people say the second one, and the third one, the second one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, a lot of folks like the second one. Yeah, it's I think it says this in the next slide, but it does its job really, really well. I also think the one about ICE agents not staying home from work during the pandemic is like, ooh. So Noah says, I get a lot of very long emails from organizations. Teehee, do you think most organizations' emails are too long? Yes and no. It's always at the end of the day a strategic decision about the length of your emails. I do think that shorter is better. Brevity is always going to have more of an impact. However, there are times where it might be important to really spend a lot of time explaining what's going on. As an example, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away and we were writing some emails to um, do some things around expanding the Supreme Court and sort of like what that game-changing moment meant for the United States, those emails ended up being pretty long, but we had a lot of ground to cover. We wanted to really lay our case for why we think the Supreme Court should be expanded. So sometimes that makes sense. Now, is that all the time? I think I agree that some orgs do have very long email copies and they don't need to be that long. Okay, here's the other one. Here's the other slide. So what do each of these have in common, each of these hooks? I'll leave this up here for a minute so folks can answer in the chat. What do they all have in common? All four of these. Let's give folks some time to read them. And people are in the chat. Urgency, yep, a sense of urgency. They're very short sentences. They set the stage. A hook sentence and a short explanation afterwards. Yeah. The creative writer brain in me would say this. They put the central conflict front and center, like right away at the very beginning of the email. You know that there is some sort of conflict happening. Yeah, somebody else says this. They present like there's a villain pretty early on, which is true because that also helps create a sense of conflict. Another part of this is that there's a contrast, a sense of contrast from one sentence to the next, right? Like rent is due, millions of families can't pay, right? That's an inherent conflict because they're very different kinds of like pieces of information that you're getting at the same time. when you can build it, well, it probably says this in the next slide. Oh yeah, conflict and contrast are the secret sauce of many engaging hooks because they create a sense of urgency. So I came up with this one right before this presentation started. Like if I were just out the back, I have to write an engaging email about the filibuster or something going on in Congress. This is what I came up with. Christmas came early for Joe Manchin because everyone on our list hates Joe Manchin. They would probably continue reading this because they would be very afraid. Um, yeah. So don't be afraid to go for the jugular because you only have a couple of seconds before your readers, look at their phone or go to TikTok or, get up and get a bite to eat. You don't have a lot of time and you're competing against a lot of prime real estate and people's attention span. So you really, really have to go for it. Don't lie, don't be unethical, but you can push the envelope. And in most cases, you probably should if you want to get good reactions. So the last and also a very difficult part of writing email is the click-worthy subject line. It's even harder than the engaging hook, even though the engaging hook is really, really important. But if your subject line isn't good enough to get people to click on the email and open it, they're not going to read anything. They're never going to take action, right? So your emails live and die by the subject line and the engaging hook once they open it. But these are the really tricky parts. A lot of folks say that this is where they have like the hardest time coming up with, how to be creative. So this is a screenshot. I'm gonna open this bigger so you can all see it. This is a screenshot of my bulk email inbox yesterday. So we're gonna look at all these different subject lines, and in the chat, let me know which one that you would open, if any. All right, I'm reading through all these. All right, let's see if folks have put in the chat. Which one of these would you open? The chilling warning, the Bob Woodward one, the act now, the one about Mark Zuckerberg because you don't like him. That also probably would have gotten me. The no voting rights, no peace. Yeah, no voting rights, no peace. Catastrophic threat of extinction. That probably would have been the one to get me. Also, like Noah, so if I were to open some of them, it would probably be the catastrophic threat of extinction because that's really scary for me. Also, I like the one about hitting Facebook where it hurts their bottom line. That was one of the first ones that I saw that I was like, ooh, like I'm down for that. Um, does so these are literally stuff that came in yesterday, the day before. What do you think is the strategy behind some of these subject lines? Why do you think they are written the way they were? Yeah, they use really, really impactful words, astronomical, Catholic, no rights, no peace, Bob Woodward's chilling warning. So there's urgency. Most of them are short so that they can be previewed. True. Um, Yeah, the Facebook one because it shows that action can be taken now. A lot of these also, they don't necessarily explain exactly what's going on, except for maybe the one that says act now, no arms sales to human rights abusers. Like you pretty much know exactly what that email is about. But for a lot of these, The answer is not necessarily super clear. Prison phone rates are astronomical. Oh, okay. Like, well, what is the ask there? What's being curiosity, like Molly says? Yeah, all of these generate a sense of curiosity. There's something that's called like the curiosity gap when we talk about email subject lines, is you want just enough information so that people are enticed, but you also want to withhold a little bit of information so that people have to actually open the email to know what you're talking about. Um, do you at sender or title first? Oh, do I look at the sender or the title first? I tend to look at the subject lines first and a little bit less at who the sender is. We at Demand Progress do a lot of testing around what the sender is. So actually, the Stop Facebook one, I think, is a Demand Progress petition that just landed in my email box. But yeah, there's ways that you can experiment with that. And when we get to question and answer time, that is a great question to bring up. Heather really wants to sign the petition to stop Facebook. So do I. Pro tips. Okay. Write your subject lines last after you've already written the whole rest of the copy of your email. This is how I do it. They always come last. And the advice that I got early on in my career, which is 100% true, is to write 25 subject lines because the first 5 are going to be a little basic. The last 5 might be brilliant. The idea here is to kind of get all the cobwebs out of your brain, right? And to get all the really obvious ideas out of the way first. Let me put this bigger so that people can see it because I think this is important. Write 25 subject lines every single email. So you have your email copy, you feel like you're ready to go, you're going to test a couple of them, but how many did you write? You wrote 25. And sometimes it takes a while because that is not always easy. But over time, it'll get easier. It'll become habit and you'll get used to it. And yes, I still write 25 emails, even though I've been working in email writing for 8 years. I still write 25 subject lines for every single email I write. Also, there's no secret to what is the best way of writing a subject line. This is mostly because trends and what is the clickbaity subject line change so quickly. Somebody mentioned that like the really good subject lines were really short so that you could see some preview text. There was a period of time not that long ago where that was not true and that really long subject lines were generating a little bit more of the curiosity and leading to higher open rates. Uh, so you have to constantly be testing them. There's no real trick or getting around to it. You just have to constantly be testing your subject lines. And you have to know that trends in subject lines change from week to week to week. So here's a couple of things to wrap up some of my thoughts. Yeah, trends in subject line clicks can change quickly. What works one week will not work the next week. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Um, in my experience, subject lines that performed highly for Demand Progress were not the same genre of subject lines that did really well at the Working Families Party. And that's because email lists are different and they have different demographics and different groups of people, and every organization has their own voice, so it works out a little bit differently. Like, for example, at the Working Families Party, pithy, really clever puns worked really well in terms of subject lines. At Demand Progress, not so much. Demand Progress email folks tend to be a little bit more cut to the chase. Which is why you have to do what? You have to write 25 subject lines for every email, and you have to constantly be testing subject lines. So let's review. So here's the anatomy of a good email. What you should do first, you should figure out the emotional resolution, the tone of the piece, what the emotional arc you want your readers to do. Yeah, here it goes. How do you want your readers to feel both before and after taking action? That's the first step. Step 2, write the strong ask. be direct, be specific, and ask for something measurable. Step 3, write a clear theory of change. If you do X, then Y will happen to Z issue. It is the strategy roadmap for the whole email. So that's step 3. Once you did all of those, maybe take a walk outside for a little bit, clear your brain. You get to the really hard parts, write the engaging hook. But the tricks here, put the conflict front and center, create a sense of contrast within your first 2 sentences. That will create the urgency that everyone talks about. Really go for the jugular, and remember you only have 2 to 7 seconds. And then last, write the subject line. Not actually one subject line, but say it with me now. 25. Write 25 subject lines. You will find 3 or 4 good ones to test. And they are probably not going to be the first 3 or 4 that you wrote. So that is it for this presentation. I'm going to do the stop the screen share momentarily, and we can open it up for questions if anybody has any questions. Also, I wonder how we're doing on time, but I assume we're doing good. Okay, how do you test your subject lines? Great question. So, most of the platforms that people use when they have large email lists, they're called CRMs. I forget what that acronym means, like content resource management systems or something. Anyway, a lot of them have built in functionality to test your subject lines. But if not, then what you do is you just do it old school. You have one email, an exact identical version, but a different subject line. You don't send them to the same people, you send them to 2 different segments. And then you look usually about 3 to 6 hours later, and you might be able to see which one got more open rates, and that's the one that did better. I came on late and maybe this was addressed, but will we have access to these slides? No, unfortunately not, but this is being recorded, so I think you might have access to the recording, which has the slides in there. What advice do you have to keep? Do you have to keep weekly update emails to membership interesting? Um, I think the advice there, how do you keep it interesting if you're doing like a weekly newsletter or something like that? Um, First is be strategic. Know why you're doing that, right? Like, is it necessary to have like a weekly newsletter? Maybe it's not. Um, Constituent relationship management. Thank you, Auntie. But yeah, so the first thing about how to keep it interesting, one, be really strategic. Understand what you're doing and why, and make sure that those things are in alignment. Two, if you are doing weekly or sometimes even bi-weekly sort of like updates to keep folks in the know, voice matters a lot. Don't sound like a robot. Sound like a real person, have an actual real opinion about what's going on. At Demand Progress, our policy team members have 2 different bi-weekly newsletters that come out, and they're hilarious because they're so snarky and there's so much shade in them. I love reading them. Even if I didn't work there, I would come back to read those newsletters because they're funny. How big should your list be for accurate A/B testing? That's a great question. There's a ton of different resources for statistical analysis online, and you do not have to be a math nerd or a statistician to use them or understand them. I never took a statistics class. I will never take a statistics class. I would say that as long as you have over 20,000 emails on your email list, you can start doing some A/B testing to 10, 2 different versions, each to 10,000 people, and get some reactions. But there's a very specific calculation, and you can Google this, that's called like the Q quotient or a Q value. There's something about, I would actually just Google sample size calculator that will let you know how much of a sample size you need to get statistically significant data from. Those things are out there. They're free. They're really easy to use. Math is no longer a barrier to actually do math anymore. They are great. Can you talk more about building an email around an individual's story? Yes, if I have time, let's look at some of the other questions. Is the view that an ask should be in the first 50-ish words or first two paragraphs still fair, or is it outdated? That's a great question. Nothing is necessarily outdated, and nothing is ever set in stone when it comes to email. And that's true of just writing in general. The thing is if you're really worried about this or interested in it, test it. Have a version that has the link really close up top and one that doesn't. I prefer to have the link really, really close because of that 2 to 7 second rule. That which that actually is the one constant we have in our email lives is 2 to 7 seconds. So I tend to have the link really high up because you want people to just take the action right away. However, there are times where the situation might call for a longer email where it takes longer to get there. So you never know. Do you have thoughts on around images, videos? Yeah, the thought mainly is to test it. So at Working Families Party when I was there, at the time I was there, emails that had images in them did really, really well. At Demand Progress, because it's a different list, images do not do that well at all. They actually do worse than just sending something that is just straight up text. So you never know. You have to really just play around and figure out what your list likes. Are there certain asks that are not great for email? I don't think so. I think vague asks are not good for email, but you can ask for anything. Ask for money, ask for people to sign petitions, ask people to show up in person. In general, those aren't very good, but I've seen it work. So it really depends on the situation. Do you have any idea if emails that include image? Okay, yeah, we talked about that. Any tips on how to grow your email list? Yes. One thing which that somebody else asked in terms of growing your email list, you can ask your email list to ask other people to join your email list, especially if you're like small and nimble and you're like, look, we're doing really great work. You know how we can do even more work is if we get more people on our email list, forward this email, ask people to join our list. That's one thing you can do. You can participate in multi-org list swaps, which is a thing. You can also pay for acquisition of new email addresses through different vendors. All of these things are pretty industry standard. And the other thing about email growth, because I was able to grow the WFP list a lot in the beginning. And one of the things that we did is we followed up with every action we did. So we're like, oh, we're going to do a petition here. And then we delivered it. We took some pictures and then we would email blast them out again and say, like, look what happened to the petition that you signed. We did something. And having that continual loop actually helped grow our list over time. What's the best way to get people to click on the links in your email blast? Make them bold, make them bright colored, and I would say put them close to the top. Also, don't link other things. Like people like to cite sources and put a little hyperlink. Don't do that. The only hyperlink in my email copies will go to the petition I want you to sign. That's it. I will cite other things, but that's not the important thing is not to go through and like fact check and cite everything else. The important thing is to get that person to sign the petition. Is it important to follow up on the status of issues causes? I do think it's incredibly important to follow up. Not only for retention, it also builds a sense of like community identity within things so that you're not just the massive organization that's sending emails out, that people are like, oh, when I take action with this group, they actually do something is really, really important. And so, yeah, following up is super, super important. Do you look at sender or subject when an email lands in your box? Is it better to send updates by different names instead of just being info, blah, 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 blah? Yes. So we, at least at Demand Progress, have done a lot of testing around the sender name and find that it does have a significant impact, which is why we stopped using our own names and start using names like Stop Facebook or Stop Jeff Bezos is one that does really well for us. Because they work. They work. I don't know why or how. They don't work on me as an individual person, but I am not my email list, which is another thing to remember. You are not the end user on your email list. What you like does not necessarily mean that your list will like it. Um, would folks be interested in figuring out a way to ID orgs that might be good for list swapping, maybe in a Google Doc or the brainstorm board embedded? That's a great idea. If we have enough time, I did want to get back to the person who asked about um, building an email around an individual story. Okay, we have 15 minutes. Awesome. Because that is a really great question. That is probably a much longer discussion. I think that whether you know it or not, when you're writing email copy that's asking for a petition signature, a donation, anything, you actually are telling stories. Um, there has been it's really list dependent, but there's some amount of evidence out there that people respond really well to stories about individual people. I've tested it a lot at Demand Progress, and our list doesn't like it. Our list kind of has their own personality. They don't like images, and they don't like these like woo woo personal stories. That doesn't mean that they don't like stories. They just don't like those stories. However, that's not everyone. So you should experiment with it and test it. I think one thing that's important if you're trying to do storytelling through email, especially around people, it's important to interview that person. It's important that they get sign off, like final approval on the email. You don't want them writing or editing the email because that's your job, but you want them to see it before it goes out and you want them to feel good about it. And that could be delicate, tricky. It's a little bit like being a journalist, except for journalists, while also storytellers are sometimes not the best storytellers. But yeah, you want to involve those people and make sure they have buy-in as well. Um, but actually, every kind of email blast you're writing out actually is a story. So I hope that answered that question for that person. So we still have some more time if people have more questions. Awesome. Um, and I am sweating because being in front of a camera is sometimes hard. Uh, do you ever worry about exhausting people with email? No. And a lot of times people ask, like, is like, how many times in a week should we email the people on our list? And I say, however many times you need something from them. It's perfectly okay to send somebody emails every day of the week. Are they going to open every single email? Of course not. And the bigger your email list will get, you will see that the open rates sometimes kind of like lag and level off. People aren't always going to read every single piece of email that you send out there. So I would not feel bad at all about hitting people up a lot. It's totally fine. I would say, in terms of time, the only maybe bad time to send an email is maybe like Friday at like 5:30 on the East Coast. People are getting into their weekend. That's probably not the best time. But weekends are also good times to email people. We send out a lot of emails on Saturday and Sunday morning. They do great. How many folks would you recommend be part of the writing process? Ideally, you just want one person to do the drafting and maybe one or two other people to review and edit and approve. You do not want to write emails by committee because they will get worse and worse and worse over time. Oh yeah, Martha had a question about emojis in subject lines. I think that is a good thing. We've tested it; it's done really well. You have to be careful on which emojis you use sometimes. Sometimes they can get spammed or they can get flagged as spam and get you into trouble. But in general, I'm all for experimenting. And I think I like emojis. How can you let folks know about an event and make that compelling? And then the next question also, I'll get to that. So how do you really have to up the stakes? You have to frame the conflict. If you want somebody to, when you're doing like event sort of recruitment, the thing about this is there's also what we call like a ladder of engagement, right? asking somebody to leave their house and come and meet you, a relative stranger, at a place they might not have ever been to do something political is a very high bar ask. That doesn't mean it's not impossible. Um, but you got to know that, like, sign the petition is like way down here. Show up at town hall and yell at the mayor with me is like way up there, right? And somewhere in between this is giving money. So just know off the bat that it's going to be hard. Really strong writing, though, really making the compelling argument of why they need to be there is important. Also, though, there's all sorts of added incentives that you can throw in there as long as it's not tone deaf. We did a lot of in person mobilizing at WFP for different events, and we would throw a pizza party in the office before we go to the campaign rally, right? So, like, come eat some free pizza, meet some of the wacky people who keep emailing you petitions, and then let's go protest. And that actually worked. So, is it possible to email a list too infrequently? Yes. And it's really, really bad for your list. There's this concept of list health. You have to constantly be emailing your list to make sure that you get engagement. Gmail uses an algorithm that dictates what people see in their inbox. So if you don't email your list enough, and they don't engage with your stuff anymore, Google's not going to send your emails to them in any place but a spam folder. And then you're not going to get any engagement out of them. And those emails, for all intents and purposes for you, is going to be a dead list. And it's really hard to resurrect a dead list. So always err on the side of send the email. There's very, very few situations in which I will admit to be like, maybe we shouldn't send an email. Almost all the time, I'm like, let's send an email. Maybe miss what was mentioned, but is there a best time to send? There is not really. Late Fridays is generally bad, but other than that, fair game. Holidays, fair game. There's not really been a lot of data to suggest that there is a bad time other than Friday. And especially those Fridays that are like historical payday Fridays. Yeah. But other than that, first couple of hours of happy hour is maybe a bad idea. And that is like really, really negligible. If you have a small list, there's no bad time to send. You should just be constantly sending. Um, I was told that too many clicks is bad, but I think RSVP links may create buy-in. When announcing an event with an email blast, are RSVP links ineffective or too much for members? Interesting question. So, too many clicks might be bad. Also, too much fields where you enter in information. There's a lot of data on this. The more info you have to put in to sign a petition or RSVP for an event, the less likely people are going to go through it. Even something like first name, zip code, right, will get much more engagement than first name, last name, zip code. That extra step, it's diminishing returns. So you don't want people to have to fill out a whole long thing unless you're trying to get them to fill out a survey, and then you let them know this will only take 2 minutes. It'll take 7. And then you have all those answers. But yeah, there is such a thing as like too many barriers to engagement. And when it comes to RSVPs, I would say, yeah, you want them to click the link from the email and be able to get the least amount of info possible. First name, email, and then use the organizer. That's probably all you need to start following up with people and make sure they're going to show up to the event. Is it sometimes too big a ask if you are trying to get lots of information? Well, the other thing that I would suggest people do on a semi-regular basis, once a year, twice a year, maybe no more than that, is a survey. Email your list and say, "Would you like to take this survey?" Um, and then you can ask them a whole bunch of questions. I wouldn't make it more than like 25 questions. But then you can figure out some like key information. This is how we found out the relative age of the average person on our email list at Demand Progress was through surveys. You can also figure out like where people live. But if a lot of your petitions have zip codes on them, then maybe you don't need to ask that question because you can already get that information internally. We had no problem asking people on our list how much money they make in a year. So we wanted to get a sense of like where people were on like the class spectrum. Um, the I think one of the tricks to email is it's not like you're doing this face to face in person with somebody, right? Where you might think like if you're asking somebody sign this petition in person, it might be like impolite or rude or the rejection might be high. This is digital. Nobody ever sees anyone's face. You can be bold and ask for a lot of stuff. Because at the end of the day, even people who sign a petition might not even remember that they signed the petition 5 minutes later. So just go for it. Yay, Betsy! It's good to see you. It's been forever. I hate that this pandemic is this pandemic. Um, any other questions? We have about 5 minutes remaining. Oh, I also wanted to share some. What do you do if you have some questions or you want to follow up with me or just follow me on social media or whatever? I'm going to screen share a slide that has my contact info in 1 second. Yep, there we go. How to find me online. You can email me at teehee@demandprogress.org. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm not really on Instagram that much. I'm more of a lurker. Um, but you should do it anyway. Why not? Occasionally, I will post pictures about my fabulous life in Mexico. And on Facebook, I'm on Facebook a lot. It's a great way if you have like just a question. If you all have any questions during your workday about email writing, chances are it's also my workday. Feel free to email me, send me a Facebook message, an Instagram thing. I will always be happy to offer any advice, answer any questions. It's really not that intrusive. Um, that might be actually one of the weird through lines of this whole training is like nothing is as intrusive as you think it is, unless we're talking about like the Patriot Act. But when we're talking about reaching out and asking a question about an email to somebody who has a lot of experience with it, feel free to do it. I would love to hear from you. And thank you so much, folks in the audience. Um, Yay. So we have a few more minutes left. I'm going to stop the screen share. If there are any other last questions, burning questions, this is your last few minutes to get them in. Or if not, you can email me or hit me up on social media. Thank you all. I hope that this was informative and enjoyable. Um, Yay. And if this was a Netroots that was in person, it would be fun to continue to run into everybody all throughout the weekend. But alas, the pandemic. What about questions in the subject line? Questions are totally fine. You can throw a whole bunch of stuff. Just experiment with subject lines. Questions, half-filled sentences, dot, dot, dots. Try it. You'll get a bunch of data and you'll find out if it works or not. Have you found those to be effective? With my current email list at Demand Progress, they respond to a very specific kind of subject line over time. So I don't do questions in the subject line. That does not mean it will not work for you. That's just the very, very persnickety and precise amount of people on our email list. I love all the people on our email list, but they have a type, and they respond to a type. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Always be testing things. Um, Always send an email out. Always look at the data, and you will do fine. And you will notice over time your email will grow because if you interact, if you engage with them, they'll engage with you, and that growth will happen. We're almost at time. Thank everyone. Thank you, everyone, so much. I'm glad this could be of help. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. Enjoy your net roots. All right. Bye, everyone.